Thanks for joining me today. Quick question. Have you ever found yourself defending a relationship that everyone around you says is toxic? If so, you're not alone. Many studies show trauma bonds are often misidentified as love and contribute to difficulty leaving abusive relationships. The scary part, both genuine attachments and trauma bonds release the same neurochemicals like oxytocin and dopamine. Your brain can't distinguish their source. This creates a confusing emotional landscape where abuse can feel like intense connection. The modern world has made this even more complicated, especially with how relationships play out in digital spaces where appearances rarely match reality. The Instagram perfect partner red flag. This brings us to the first major warning sign that you're dealing with a trauma bond instead of genuine love. Picture this: Sarah scrolls through Instagram and sees another post from her boyfriend Jake. It's a photo of them at dinner with the caption about how lucky he is to have his queen. The comments pour in about relationship goals and how cute they are together. Sarah stares at the screen and feels this weird disconnect. Just 2 hours earlier, Jake screamed at her in the car because she suggested a different restaurant. He called her stupid and said she never appreciates anything he does for her. But now here's this post with hundreds of likes telling a completely different story. Social media intensifies these dynamics by creating false public narratives that reinforce trauma bonds. Public declarations of love on social media after private abuse force you to question your reality. They use the validation from others to reinforce the idea that your relationship is actually perfect. They make it harder for you to reach out for help because everyone thinks you have the ideal partnership. Abusers now flood feeds with romance to mask abuse, a modern form of love bombing. They tag you in everything, share memories that paint your relationship in the most flattering light, and write long captions about how much you mean to them while treating you poorly in private. They might post about how grateful they are for your support on the same day they told you that you're worthless. This creates a psychological mind game that's particularly cruel. When someone posts about your amazing relationship and hundreds of people validate that narrative with likes and comments, your brain starts to doubt your private experiences. You begin to think maybe you're being too sensitive. Maybe you're overreacting to their behavior. Maybe the relationship really is as wonderful as it appears online. The external validation becomes more powerful than your internal warning system. Research shows that 75% of survivors experience social isolation through technology-aided manipulation. The constant stream of positive reinforcement from the outside world drowns out the voice in your head that's trying to tell you something is wrong. Your brain gets stuck trying to reconcile two completely different versions of your relationship. The public version looks like a fairy tale. The private version feels like a nightmare. Red flag social media behaviors go beyond just posting cute photos. They might tag you in posts without asking first, especially ones that make claims about your feelings or your relationship status. They could insist on posting couple photos even when you're not comfortable with it. They might write captions that speak for you or describe emotions you didn't express. Some will demand access to your social media accounts or want to approve what you post before you share it. Others will get angry if you don't immediately like or comment on their posts about your relationship. The most obvious red flag is the timing of these posts. Pay attention to when your partner decides to flood social media with romantic content. Does it happen right after a fight? Do they post about how much they love you immediately following a period where they treated you badly? Do they share throwback photos of happy times when things are tense between you privately? This isn't coincidence. It's a calculated move to reset the narrative and make you forget about recent problems. You've all seen those couples who post photos with captions like, "So blessed to have this amazing man," while you know for a fact they were screaming at each other in the parking lot 30 minutes earlier. There's something almost comical about the speed at which people can switch from genuine anger to performed happiness for the camera. But when you're living it, there's nothing funny about the confusion it creates in your mind. The reason this digital manipulation works so well comes down to basic psychology. Human brains are wired to seek consistency in our experiences. When we encounter conflicting information, we experience something called cognitive dissonance. It's uncomfortable to hold two opposing ideas at the same time, so our minds work overtime to create a coherent story that makes sense of the contradiction. Usually, we default to believing the version that has the most social proof behind it. In this case, the social proof comes in the form of likes, comments, and shares. When 200 people validate your partner's post about what an amazing relationship you have, that carries psychological weight. Your brain interprets all those positive reactions as evidence that the public version of your relationship is the accurate one. Meanwhile, the private abuse becomes something you minimize, excuse, or forget entirely. You start to think maybe you remember things wrong. Maybe you're being dramatic. Maybe your relationship really is as perfect as everyone else seems to think it is. This digital manipulation makes it significantly harder to trust your own instincts about the relationship. Your gut might be telling you that something feels off, but the constant stream of external validation tells you everything is fine. You stop listening to your internal warning system because it conflicts with what everyone else can see. This is exactly what the abusive partner wants. They need you to doubt your own perceptions so they can continue their behavior without consequences. The psychological impact goes deeper than just confusion about your relationship status. When you live with this constant contradiction between public and private reality, you start to lose faith in your ability to accurately assess situations. You begin to second-guess yourself about everything, not just your romantic relationship. Your confidence in your own judgment erodes over time. You become more dependent on external validation to determine how you should feel about your experiences. Breaking free from this pattern requires recognizing that genuine love doesn't need constant public validation to exist. Healthy relationships don't require social media campaigns to prove their worth. Real partners don't use Instagram posts to manipulate your perception of reality. They don't time their romantic gestures to coincide with damage control. They don't need hundreds of strangers to confirm that your relationship is solid. When someone truly loves you, their private behavior matches their public declarations. They treat you well whether anyone is watching or not. They don't save their kindness for moments when they can document it and share it online. They don't use social media as a tool to make you question your own experiences or to reset the narrative after they've hurt you. But even when you recognize these social media red flags, there's another pattern that keeps you hooked. The way your partner's emotions shift creates an addictive cycle that's almost impossible to resist. The emotional slot machine effect. This pattern operates exactly like a slot machine at a casino. Your partner's emotional state changes faster than you can predict. One minute they're telling you you're the most amazing person they've ever met, showering you with compliments and making you feel like you're on top of the world. The next minute they're cold, distant, and treating you like you don't exist. Then suddenly they're back to being sweet and affectionate, leaving you wondering what just happened and desperately hoping the good mood will stick around this time. This unpredictable emotional pattern isn't just confusing. It's actually one of the most powerful psychological mechanisms that keeps people trapped in trauma bonds. What you're experiencing is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same principle that makes gambling so addictive. When rewards come at unpredictable intervals, your brain becomes obsessed with trying to figure out what triggers the next positive response. The science behind this is both fascinating and disturbing. Intermittent reinforcement creates a much stronger psychological bond than consistent positive treatment ever could. If someone treats you well all the time, your brain adapts to that baseline and stops, releasing as much dopamine in response to their kindness. But when someone treats you well sporadically and unpredictably, every positive interaction triggers a massive dopamine release that feels incredible by comparison. Abusers don't necessarily plan this pattern consciously. Many of them learn these behaviors from their own traumatic backgrounds. But whether it's intentional or not, the cycle creates a powerful dependency. They might spend 3 days being cruel and dismissive, then surprise you with an amazing date night where they're attentive and loving. Your brain doesn't focus on the 3 bad days. It fixates on that one incredible evening and starts working overtime to figure out how to make it happen again. The cycle always follows a predictable structure, even though the timing remains unpredictable. First comes the tension-building phase, where you can feel their mood shifting and you start walking on eggshells. Then comes the explosion, where they lash out, withdraw emotionally, or treat you poorly. Finally comes the reconciliation phase, where they're suddenly wonderful again. They might not apologize directly, but they'll be extra charming, extra affectionate, or extra attentive. This pattern literally rewires your brain over time. Every positive interaction after a period of negative treatment creates a stronger neural pathway than regular kindness would. Your brain starts to associate the relief from pain with intense pleasure. You begin to crave not just their affection, but specifically their affection after they've withheld it. The contrast makes the good moments feel more powerful than they actually are. Research shows that intermittent reinforcement in toxic relationships affects dopamine pathways similarly to gambling addiction. The brain craves the next jackpot of affection, leading to intense cravings, anxiety, and depression when attempts are made to leave the relationship. This neurochemical similarity explains why willpower alone is often insufficient to break these patterns. Your brain is literally addicted to the unpredictable reward schedule your partner provides. The most telling sign that you're caught in this pattern is how you react to basic human decency from your partner. You find yourself feeling genuinely grateful when they remember your birthday, don't yell at you for a whole week, or show up when they say they will. You celebrate these moments like you've won the lottery, even though these behaviors should be the absolute minimum standard in any relationship. Think about how strange that is. You're throwing a mental party because someone treated you with basic respect. You're feeling lucky and grateful for things that should be automatic. You catch yourself thinking thoughts like, he's been so good to me lately, after a period where he simply wasn't cruel. You feel genuinely appreciative when she doesn't pick a fight during dinner, as if her decision not to ruin your meal is some kind of generous gift. This emotional rollercoaster becomes addictive because your brain learns to associate love with intensity rather than consistency. Calm, steady affection starts to feel boring or even wrong. You begin to equate drama with passion and chaos with excitement. When someone treats you well consistently, you might find yourself feeling restless or disconnected because your nervous system has adapted to living in a constant state of anticipation and hypervigilance. The addiction metaphor isn't just a comparison, it's neurologically accurate. Your brain develops the same tolerance patterns that occur with substance abuse. You need bigger and bigger emotional highs to feel satisfied. Regular expressions of love don't register as meaningful anymore because your reward system has been hijacked by the unpredictable pattern. You start to interpret consistent kindness as indifference because it doesn't trigger the same neurochemical response as intermittent kindness. This explains why so many people struggle to leave relationships that are obviously harmful. Their brain chemistry has adapted to the cycle. The thought of leaving triggers withdrawal symptoms that feel very similar to what someone experiences when quitting drugs or alcohol. You might feel intense anxiety, depression, and physical cravings for your partner's attention, even when you rationally know the relationship is destroying your mental health. Healthy relationships operate on a completely different principle. They provide security instead of adrenaline rushes. The excitement comes from growing together, sharing experiences, and building something meaningful over time. It doesn't come from the relief of surviving another emotional crisis or the temporary high of reconciliation after conflict. In a healthy relationship, your partner's good treatment of you feels stable and predictable. You don't spend your mental energy trying to decode their moods or figure out what you need to do to maintain their affection. You don't feel like you're playing an emotional slot machine where you never know if you're going to hit the jackpot or lose everything you've invested. The key insight here is recognizing that love shouldn't feel like gambling with your emotional well-being. If you find yourself constantly hoping for the next jackpot of affection, celebrating basic kindness like it's extraordinary, or feeling addicted to the emotional highs and lows of your relationship, you're not experiencing healthy love. You're caught in a neurochemical trap that keeps you hooked on unpredictability, rather than helping you build genuine intimacy and security. But the manipulation doesn't stop at emotional games. Modern technology has given abusers tools that previous generations could never have imagined, turning your phone into a weapon against your own freedom. The digital surveillance state. Marcus gets a text from his girlfriend Emma at 2:47 p.m. Why does your location show you're at Target when you said you were going to the grocery store? He stares at his phone, confused. He did stop at Target first to grab a birthday card for his mom, then went to the grocery store like he planned. But now he has to explain his entire afternoon itinerary like he's reporting to a parole officer. Emma knows exactly where he's been, how long he stayed, and even what route he took to get there. She checks his location so frequently that she notices when he makes unplanned stops that last longer than 5 minutes. This constant digital monitoring represents one of the most insidious warning signs of a trauma bond. Your devices become surveillance tools that would make intelligence agencies jealous. They can track your location in real time, read your private messages, monitor your social media activity, check your browsing history, and even see how much time you spend on specific apps. What makes this particularly dangerous is how these behaviors often start small and escalate gradually until you're living under complete digital supervision. The progression usually begins with seemingly innocent requests that sound caring rather than controlling. They might suggest sharing locations for safety reasons or ask for your social media passwords because couples shouldn't have secrets from each other. They frame these requests as signs of intimacy and trust. You might even feel flattered at first that someone cares enough about you to want that level of connection. The problem is that what starts as voluntary sharing quickly becomes mandatory monitoring. Once they have access to your digital life, the surveillance intensifies in ways that would shock you if they happened all at once. They start checking your location multiple times per day and questioning any deviations from your normal routine. They read through your text messages and demand explanations for conversations that seem suspicious to them. They scroll through your social media interactions and become upset about likes, comments, or follows from people they don't approve of. They might even start monitoring your email, checking your search history, or demanding access to your work communications. This constant digital scrutiny creates a prison-like environment that's disguised as caring attention. You start to modify your behavior not based on what you actually want to do, but based on how you think it will look to someone who's watching your every move. You avoid certain locations because you don't want to trigger questions. You stop texting certain friends because you're tired of explaining those relationships. You become hyper-aware of your online activity because you know someone is analyzing every click, every search, and every interaction. The psychological impact of living under this level of surveillance is profound and often underestimated. You begin to internalize the monitoring to the point where you start policing yourself, even when your partner isn't actively checking on you. You find yourself hesitating before you like someone's photo on Instagram because you're worried about how it might be interpreted. You think twice before stopping somewhere unplanned because you know you'll have to explain it later. You start deleting text messages or clearing your browsing history, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you don't want to deal with the interrogation that might follow. Modern surveillance tactics have evolved far beyond basic location sharing and password access. Some partners demand to check your screen time, reports to see exactly how many hours you spent on specific apps and websites. Others insist on having access to your cloud storage accounts, email accounts, and even your work communications. They might install tracking apps on your devices that monitor everything from your keystrokes to your phone calls. Some will demand that you leave your phone unlocked at all times or require that you respond to their messages within a specific time frame, regardless of what you're doing. The most invasive controllers know your digital habits better than social media algorithms know your interests. They can tell you exactly what time you were last active on various platforms, who you've been messaging most frequently, and which posts you've liked or shared recently. They notice when you change your profile picture, update your status, or follow new accounts. They track patterns in your online behavior and question any changes, no matter how minor they might seem. What makes this behavior particularly insidious is how it becomes normalized over time. The escalation happens so gradually that you don't notice how abnormal your situation has become until you're already deep in the surveillance trap. You start to think that constant monitoring is just what committed relationships look like. You convince yourself that their need to know your whereabouts at all times is evidence of how much they care about you. You interpret their demands for password access as signs of trust and intimacy rather than control and manipulation. This digital surveillance serves multiple purposes beyond just gathering information about your activities. It sends a clear message that you're not trusted to make decisions independently or maintain appropriate boundaries with other people. It creates a constant state of anxiety because you never know when something you've done will trigger their anger or disappointment. It isolates you from potential support systems because you become reluctant to reach out to friends or family members who might ask questions about your relationship. Living under constant digital scrutiny fundamentally changes your relationship with technology and privacy. You start to view your own devices as potential sources of conflict rather than tools for connection and productivity. You become paranoid about your online activity even when you're not doing anything questionable. You lose the ability to relax and be spontaneous because you know that everything you do will be subject to analysis and potential criticism. The most damaging aspect of this digital surveillance is how it trains you to accept violations of your basic right to privacy and autonomy. You start to believe that having personal space, private conversations, or unmonitored time is somehow selfish or suspicious. You internalize the idea that love requires complete transparency and that wanting any privacy means you're hiding something or being dishonest. Breaking free from this pattern requires recognizing that healthy love operates on trust rather than surveillance. Partners who genuinely care about you don't need to track your every movement or monitor your every interaction. They don't demand access to your private communications or question your right to have personal space. Real love encourages independence and trusts you to make good decisions without constant oversight. But here's where things get even more complicated. Even when you recognize these surveillance patterns as unhealthy, your brain has developed another defense mechanism that makes it incredibly difficult to hold onto that awareness. You might find yourself struggling to remember exactly why you were upset about their behavior in the first place. The trauma bond amnesia phenomenon. This memory distortion creates a psychological trap that's incredibly difficult to escape. Lisa sits across from her boyfriend David after what feels like their biggest fight yet. 3 hours ago, she was furious about something he said that cut deep and made her question everything about their relationship. She remembers feeling that familiar knot in her stomach and thinking this might finally be the moment she finds the courage to walk away. But now, after his heartfelt apology and explanation, she can't quite recall what made her so upset in the first place. The details feel fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream after you've been awake for a few hours. She knows she was hurt, but the specific words he used and the exact reasons for her anger have somehow evaporated from her mind. This scenario illustrates one of the most confusing aspects of trauma bonding that researchers call trauma-induced memory suppression. Your brain has a built-in protection system that shields you from psychological pain by making it harder to recall experiences that caused you distress. When someone hurts you repeatedly, your mind starts to blur the edges of those memories to help you function day to day. This isn't a conscious choice you're making. It's an automatic defense mechanism that kicks in when your emotional system becomes overwhelmed. The way this works is both fascinating and tragic. Your brain treats emotional trauma similarly to how it handles physical trauma. When you experience something that causes intense psychological pain, your nervous system floods with stress hormones that actually interfere with normal memory formation. The hippocampus, which is responsible for creating and storing memories, doesn't function properly when you're in a state of extreme emotional distress. This means that traumatic experiences often get stored as fragmented pieces rather than complete, coherent memories. Your mind becomes remarkably selective about which relationship memories it preserves with crystal clarity and which ones it allows to fade into a confusing haze. You might remember every detail of the romantic dinner where your partner surprised you with flowers, but struggle to recall the specific cruel things they said during last week's argument. You can perfectly recreate the feeling of dancing together in your kitchen, but the memory of them screaming at you for forgetting to pick up their dry cleaning feels distant and unclear. This selective memory creates a dangerously distorted view of your relationship, where only the positive experiences feel real and immediate. The good memories remain vivid and emotionally charged, while the bad memories become abstract and detached. You start to doubt whether the negative experiences were actually as bad as you initially thought. Maybe you were overreacting. Maybe you misunderstood their intentions. Maybe the problem was your sensitivity rather than their behavior. Current research on trauma and memory reveals just how significantly these experiences can impair your ability to accurately assess your relationship. Studies show that people in abusive relationships often struggle to provide specific examples of mistreatment when asked by therapists, friends, or family members. They know something feels wrong, but they can't point to concrete incidents that justify their concerns. This makes it incredibly difficult to explain to others why you're unhappy or to convince yourself that your feelings are valid. The memory suppression shows up in everyday conversations in ways that can be both frustrating and embarrassing. Your friends might ask you to explain why you seem so stressed about your relationship, and you find yourself stumbling to come up with specific examples. You know your partner has said hurtful things, but you can't remember the exact words. You know they've made you feel small and worthless, but the details of how and when this happened remain frustratingly out of reach. You develop the memory retention of a goldfish when it comes to red flags, but somehow maintain photographic recall for every romantic gesture and sweet moment. You can describe in vivid detail the surprise picnic they planned 2 months ago, complete with what you both wore and exactly what they said that made your heart flutter, but ask you to recall the fight you had yesterday where they called you names, and suddenly your memory becomes unreliable. This phenomenon isn't accidental or random. Abusive partners, whether consciously or unconsciously, learn to exploit this psychological defense mechanism to maintain control over the relationship. They understand that following periods of cruelty with intense affection will make the good times more memorable than the bad times. They know that your brain will naturally suppress the painful memories while holding onto the pleasant ones. This pattern isn't just emotionally manipulative. It's neurologically manipulative. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing because your suppressed memories make it harder to trust your own instincts about the relationship. When you can't clearly remember why you were upset or what specifically made you want to leave, you start to question whether your negative feelings are justified. You begin to think maybe you're being too dramatic or too sensitive. Maybe the relationship really is as wonderful as your clearest memories suggest. This is why mental health professionals consistently recommend keeping a written record of incidents in potentially abusive relationships. Your journal becomes an external memory system that your trauma responses can't edit or suppress. When you write down what happened immediately after it occurs, you create a factual record that your brain can't selectively forget or minimize later. Having trusted friends who can remind you of conversations you've had about your relationship serves a similar function. These people become your reality anchors when your own memory becomes unreliable. They can say things like, "Remember last month when you called me crying because he threw your belongings out on the lawn?" Or "You've told me 3 separate times that he's threatened to leave you if you don't stop seeing your sister." The friends who serve this function aren't being dramatic or trying to break up your relationship. They're providing you with information that your own psychological defense system is hiding from you. They're helping you maintain access to your complete relationship history instead of just the edited version your trauma responses have created. This external validation becomes crucial because trauma-induced memory suppression doesn't just affect your ability to recall specific incidents. It affects your overall sense of reality and your confidence in your own perceptions. When you can't trust your memory, you start to doubt everything else about your judgment and intuition. The most important insight here is recognizing that if you consistently can't remember why you were upset with your partner, your mind might be protecting you from acknowledging experiences that are too painful to fully process. Your memory gaps aren't evidence that the problems don't exist. They're evidence that the problems might be too severe for your psyche to handle without this protective mechanism kicking in. When your brain starts editing your relationship history to remove the worst parts, it's trying to help you survive emotionally. But survival and thriving are two completely different things, and memory suppression might be keeping you trapped in a situation that's slowly destroying your sense of self. But there's another insidious tactic at work that makes it even harder to maintain perspective on your relationship. When you can't rely on your own memory, the people who could help you see clearly start mysteriously disappearing from your life. The isolation island strategy. Rachel suddenly realizes she hasn't talked to her best friend Megan in over 3 months. She stares at her phone, scrolling through their text history, and sees that their last real conversation was back in September. Megan used to be the person she called about everything. They talked almost daily for years, but somehow, without Rachel even noticing, that connection just disappeared. She thinks back to when the communication started dropping off and remembers her boyfriend Jake making subtle comments about Megan being a bad influence. He never directly told her to stop talking to Megan, but he'd roll his eyes when her phone buzzed with Megan's texts. He'd make jokes about how Megan was probably jealous of their relationship. He'd suggest they do something together right when Rachel had plans to see Megan. Eventually, Rachel stopped reaching out to avoid the tension, and Megan stopped trying too. This gradual disappearance of your support system represents one of the most devastating tactics used in trauma bonding relationships. Modern abusers have perfected subtle isolation techniques that are much more sophisticated than the obvious controlling behaviors most people expect. They don't typically issue ultimatums or forbid you from seeing certain people outright. Instead, they use psychological manipulation to make you voluntarily distance yourself from the people who care about you most. The process starts with seemingly innocent observations and concerns. They might mention that your sister seems stressed whenever they're around, or that your college friends don't really understand your current life situation. They'll point out how your coworkers complain too much, or how your best friend gives terrible relationship advice. These comments plant seeds of doubt about the people in your support network without directly attacking those relationships. From there, the progression becomes more calculated. They start creating scheduling conflicts that make it difficult for you to maintain your other relationships. They'll plan romantic surprises during times when you have existing plans with friends. They'll suddenly need your help with something urgent right when you're supposed to have dinner with your family. They'll suggest couples activities that conflict with your established social commitments, making you choose between maintaining your relationship and honoring your other obligations. The manipulation escalates as they begin actively creating conflict between you and your loved ones. A 2025 study published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence revealed that 60% of abusers intentionally instigated drama with the victim's family or friends, often spreading rumors or making false accusations to damage those relationships. They might tell your friends that you've been complaining about them, or share private information you confided in them to create awkwardness in your other relationships. They become masters at positioning themselves as your only true ally in a world full of people who don't understand or appreciate you. After they create problems between you and others, they offer themselves as the solution. They'll say things like, "I'm the only one who really gets you," or "everyone else is just jealous of what we have together." They make you feel like your relationship with them is special and unique in a way that your other relationships could never be. The statistics on social isolation in toxic relationships are staggering. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 75% of domestic violence survivors experience social isolation as a form of control. Research from 2025 indicates that victims of social isolation experienced a 50% increase in symptoms of depression and anxiety compared to those in abusive relationships who maintained social connections. Manipulation tactics have evolved with technology in ways that make isolation even more effective. A 2025 study by the University of South Florida found that 40% of abusers use social media to monitor their victims' communications and relationships, while 35% use digital means to create conflict between the victim and their friends and family. They might screenshot your conversations with friends and question you about inside jokes or shared memories. One of the most telling aspects of this pattern is how these partners develop an almost supernatural ability to have emergencies whenever you have plans with other people. Your sister's birthday dinner, suddenly they're having a panic attack and need you to come home immediately. Your friend's going away party, they've just had a terrible day at work and can't handle being alone. Your mom wants to take you shopping, they've started feeling sick and need you to take care of them. The psychological impact of losing your support network goes far beyond simple loneliness. These relationships serve as your reality-checking systems. Friends and family members can offer outside perspectives on your situation and remind you of who you were before this relationship started consuming your identity. They can point out changes in your behavior or mood that you might not notice yourself. They provide emotional validation that doesn't come from the same person who's causing you pain. When you lose access to these external viewpoints, you become entirely dependent on your partner's version of reality. You have no one to confirm whether their treatment of you is normal or acceptable. You have no one to remind you of your strengths and accomplishments when they're tearing down your self-esteem. You have no one to offer alternative perspectives when they're rewriting the narrative of your relationship. A 2025 study by the National Domestic Violence Hotline found that 80% of abusers would actively create conflict between the victim and their support network, then offer themselves as the only person the victim could trust. This positioning makes victims increasingly dependent on the abuser for emotional validation and support, which strengthens the trauma bond and makes leaving feel impossible. The most insidious aspect of this isolation strategy is how it happens gradually enough that you don't notice until you're already completely cut off. Each individual incident seems minor and explainable. Missing one dinner with friends doesn't seem like a big deal. Skipping one family gathering feels reasonable. But these small compromises accumulate over time until you look around and realize you're completely alone, except for the person who orchestrated your isolation. Without external voices to validate your concerns or remind you of your worth, you start to doubt whether your negative feelings about the relationship are justified. This is when your mind kicks into overdrive, working around the clock to create explanations that make sense of behaviors that should be completely unacceptable. The excuse manufacturing factory. This constant mental effort transforms you into an expert storyteller, but the only story you're telling is why you should stay in a relationship that's slowly destroying your mental health. Meet Sarah, who could easily take home the gold medal in Olympic-level excuse-making when it comes to her boyfriend Tom's behavior. When Tom screams at her for forgetting to buy his favorite cereal, she explains to her friends that he's just passionate about his morning routine. When he throws her phone across the room during an argument, she tells her sister that he grew up in a house where people expressed emotions loudly. When he shows up drunk to her work party and embarrasses her in front of her colleagues, she creates an elaborate story about how the stress from his new job is making him drink more than usual. Sarah has developed such sophisticated reasoning skills that she could probably teach a master class in creative problem solving, except the only problem she's solving is how to stay in a relationship that's slowly destroying her mental health. This pattern of excuse manufacturing represents one of the most psychologically complex aspects of trauma bonding. Your brain has a fundamental need to create coherent narratives that protect your self-image and validate your choices. When you invest time, energy, and emotions into a relationship, your mind works overtime to justify that investment, even when the evidence suggests you're making a terrible decision. This isn't conscious deception or deliberate self-sabotage. It's an automatic psychological process that kicks in when your reality conflicts with your expectations of love. The excuse-making process starts small and escalates into elaborate storytelling that would impress professional screenwriters. At first, you might explain away minor incidents by saying your partner was tired or stressed. But as the behavior gets worse, your explanations become more creative and detailed. You develop complex theories about their childhood trauma, their work pressures, their family dynamics, or their mental health struggles. You become an expert at reframing abuse as misunderstandings, cruelty as stress responses, and manipulation as miscommunication. This mental gymnastics stems from cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable feeling you experience when your beliefs don't match your reality. You believe that love should feel safe, supportive, and nurturing, but your daily experience involves walking on eggshells, managing someone else's emotions, and feeling anxious about your partner's next mood swing. Your brain can't comfortably hold these two conflicting truths at the same time, so it works to resolve the contradiction by changing how you interpret the negative experiences. Research from 2025 reveals fascinating insights into how our brains justify staying in harmful situations. Studies show that people in toxic relationships use cognitive biases like confirmation bias, where they actively seek information that confirms their existing beliefs about their partner's potential for change. They also employ the fundamental attribution error, attributing their partner's abusive behavior to external circumstances rather than acknowledging it as a pattern of choice. These psychological mechanisms allow victims to maintain hope for the relationship while minimizing the significance of ongoing harm. The excuse patterns that emerge in these relationships follow predictable themes that researchers have documented extensively. External stressors become the go-to explanation for almost everything. Your partner isn't emotionally abusive, they're just overwhelmed at work. They're not controlling, they're just worried about finances. They're not manipulative, they're just dealing with family problems. Every cruel word, every hostile action, every boundary violation gets filtered through the lens of outside pressures that will eventually resolve themselves. Childhood trauma becomes another favorite explanation that sounds compassionate and understanding while completely avoiding accountability. You convince yourself that your partner can't help their behavior because of what happened to them 20 years ago. You become their unpaid therapist, constantly analyzing their past to explain their present actions. You tell yourself that with enough patience and love, you can help them heal from their wounds. The problem is that understanding someone's background and excusing their harmful behavior are two completely different things. Temporary circumstances provide the third pillar of the excuse-making structure. This is just a rough patch. Things will get better once they finish school, get a promotion, resolve their legal issues, or complete their therapy. You always have a timeline in your head for when the relationship will transform into what you originally hoped it would become. The goalposts keep moving, but the hope remains constant. Next month will be different. Next year will be better. Once this current crisis passes, you'll finally have the loving relationship you deserve. By this point, you've basically earned a PhD in creative reasoning when it comes to toxic behavior. You can take any incident and spin it into a narrative that protects your partner's image and your relationship's future. You become so skilled at this mental gymnastics that you can justify things you would never tolerate if they happen to your friends or family members. You develop different standards for your own treatment than you would accept for people you care about. The psychological toll of this constant excuse manufacturing is enormous and often underestimated. A 2025 study found that the mental gymnastics involved in excuse-making exhaust psychological resources, leading to increased stress, anxiety, and depression. The constant effort to create coherent narratives that protect your self-image and justify staying in a harmful situation drains your mental energy and makes it even harder to recognize the abuse or find the strength to leave. The more complex your excuses become, the greater the psychological burden you carry. This mental exhaustion explains why people in trauma bonds often struggle with decision-making in other areas of their lives. Your brain is working so hard to maintain the relationship narrative that you have less cognitive resources available for work, friendships, hobbies, or personal goals. You might find yourself feeling scattered, forgetful, or unable to concentrate on tasks that used to be easy for you. The excuse-making also creates a dangerous feedback loop that strengthens the trauma bond over time. Every time you successfully explain away your partner's behavior, you reinforce your commitment to the relationship. You've invested mental energy into creating a story that makes staying seem reasonable, which makes leaving feel like admitting you were wrong about everything. The more elaborate your excuses become, the harder it gets to abandon the narrative you've constructed. Understanding someone's background provides context for their behavior, but it should never excuse harmful actions toward you. You can acknowledge that your partner experienced childhood abuse while still maintaining that their treatment of you is unacceptable. You can recognize that they're dealing with work stress while refusing to become their emotional punching bag. Compassion doesn't require you to tolerate mistreatment, and empathy doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being for someone else's comfort. The most important insight here is recognizing that you shouldn't need a law degree to justify your partner's treatment of you. Healthy relationships don't require constant explanation, interpretation, or defense. When someone truly loves you, their actions align with their words consistently enough that you don't need to become a professional storyteller to make sense of their behavior. But all this mental energy you're pouring into excuse-making comes at a cost that goes far beyond just feeling confused about your relationship. The emotional vampire effect. Your energy gets completely drained by these one-sided emotional exchanges that leave you feeling like you just finished running a marathon while carrying a 50-pound backpack. Jamie drags herself home after spending the evening with her boyfriend Alex, and she feels exhausted even though they didn't do anything physically demanding. They just had dinner and watched a movie. But during those 2 hours, Alex complained about his coworkers for 30 minutes, spiraled into anxiety about his upcoming presentation for another 20 minutes, then got upset because Jamie seemed distracted when he was talking. She spent the entire evening managing his emotions, validating his concerns, and trying to keep his mood stable. Now she's home feeling drained, depleted, and wondering why spending time with someone who supposedly loves her feels like the most exhausting part of her day. This energy-draining dynamic represents one of the clearest warning signs that you're caught in a trauma bond rather than experiencing healthy love. These relationships create one-sided emotional exchanges where you're constantly giving energy, attention, and emotional labor while receiving very little in return. You become responsible for managing another person's emotional state while your own needs get completely ignored or dismissed. The relationship turns into an exhausting performance where your primary job is keeping your partner happy, calm, and validated regardless of what you might be going through yourself. The pattern starts subtly but quickly escalates into a full-time emotional management position that you never applied for. You find yourself constantly monitoring your partner's mood and adjusting your behavior accordingly. If they seem irritated, you become hypervigilant about not saying or doing anything that might make it worse. If they're anxious, you drop everything to provide reassurance and support. If they're angry about something unrelated to you, you somehow end up being the person who has to fix their emotional state and help them feel better. This emotional caretaking becomes so automatic that you stop recognizing how unbalanced the exchange has become. You're always the one asking how their day went, but they rarely show genuine interest in your experiences. You remember details about their work stress, family drama, and personal concerns, but they seem to forget important things happening in your life. You celebrate their achievements and comfort them during setbacks, but your own victories go unnoticed, and your struggles get minimized or ignored. Abusers use others as emotional regulation systems, treating their partners like human mood stabilizers rather than independent people with their own emotional needs. They never learned healthy coping strategies for managing difficult emotions, so they depend on others to do that work for them. When they feel anxious, you become their therapist. When they feel insecure, you become their personal cheerleader. When they feel angry, you become their emotional punching bag. Your role in the relationship becomes maintaining their psychological equilibrium at the expense of your own. Research from 2025 reveals the significant toll this emotional labor takes on people trapped in toxic relationships. A study in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology found that individuals in relationships with high levels of emotional manipulation experienced a 35% decrease in reported energy levels and a 40% reduction in feelings of joy. The constant need to manage someone else's emotions while neglecting your own needs leads to emotional exhaustion and a loss of motivation that impacts both personal and professional aspects of life. The health consequences extend beyond just feeling tired. A 2025 study in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that individuals in relationships with high levels of emotional manipulation experienced a 15% increase in symptoms of anxiety and a 20% increase in symptoms of depression. The chronic stress from constantly managing another person's emotional state creates physical symptoms like headaches, insomnia, and stomach problems that are direct manifestations of living in survival mode. You essentially become the designated mood manager, crisis counselor, and ego booster all rolled into one unpaid position. Your partner has a bad day at work, and suddenly you're running a therapy session in your living room. They feel insecure about their appearance, and you're delivering a motivational speech about their attractiveness. They get into a conflict with a friend, and you're playing mediator and relationship expert. The most frustrating part is that no matter how much emotional labor you provide, it never seems to be enough. This creates a dynamic where you start to feel like an emotional failure because you can't successfully regulate another person's internal state. You blame yourself when your reassurance doesn't eliminate their anxiety or when your support doesn't fix their depression. You develop a sense of responsibility for their emotional well-being that's completely unrealistic and unfair. You begin to believe that if you just try harder, say the right things, or provide better support, you'll finally be able to make them consistently happy and stable. The one-sided emotional exchange gradually erodes your sense of self as you lose touch with your own needs, feelings, and experiences. You become so focused on managing their emotional state that you stop paying attention to your own internal signals. You might not even notice that you're stressed, tired, or unhappy because all your mental energy goes toward monitoring and responding to their emotional fluctuations. You start to define your worth based on how successfully you can keep them in a good mood, rather than on your own achievements, growth, or happiness. This emotional vampire effect creates codependency that makes leaving feel impossible because you've become convinced that your partner can't function without your constant emotional support. You worry about what will happen to them if you're not there to manage their anxiety, boost their confidence, or help them process their problems. You feel guilty about the idea of withdrawing your emotional labor because you've been conditioned to believe that your primary value in the relationship comes from serving as their personal emotional regulation system. The difference between mutual emotional support and one-sided emotional caretaking becomes clear when you examine the balance of give and take in the relationship. Healthy partners take turns being the supporter and the supported. They show genuine interest in each other's emotional experiences and provide comfort during difficult times without keeping score. The emotional labor flows both directions, and both people feel energized by the connection rather than drained by the constant demands. The key insight that can help you recognize this pattern is understanding that healthy love energizes you rather than draining your life force. When someone genuinely cares about you, spending time with them should generally leave you feeling uplifted, supported, and valued. You should feel like your emotional needs matter, and that the relationship adds positive energy to your life rather than constantly depleting your reserves. But when you're this emotionally exhausted, it becomes much easier for someone to manipulate your perception of what's actually happening in your relationship. The reality distortion field. This vulnerability opens the door to an even more sophisticated form of manipulation that systematically destroys your ability to trust your own experiences. Maria walks out of a conversation with her boyfriend Kevin feeling completely confused about what just happened. 20 minutes ago, she was certain that Kevin had promised to pick her up from work today. She specifically remembers him saying he would be there at 5:30 because her car was in the shop. But after talking to him on the phone, she's somehow convinced that she misunderstood the entire conversation. Kevin insists he never said he would pick her up. He claims he told her yesterday that he had meetings all afternoon and couldn't help with transportation. He even suggests that maybe she's been so stressed lately that she's not remembering things clearly. Now Maria is standing outside her office at 6:15, wondering if her memory is playing tricks on her, and feeling embarrassed that she might have completely imagined a conversation that felt so real just hours earlier. This systematic undermining of your perception represents one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation in trauma-bonded relationships. Gaslighting has evolved far beyond the simple denial tactics that people used decades ago. Modern abusers have access to digital communication tools that make reality distortion more sophisticated and harder to detect. They can delete text messages, edit social media posts, and manipulate digital evidence to support their version of events while making you question your own memory and sanity. The concept of gaslighting takes its name from a 1944 movie where a husband systematically manipulates his wife's environment and denies her perceptions to make her believe she's losing her mind. Today's abusers use similar tactics, but with 21st century tools that make the manipulation even more effective. They can point to their phone and show you that they never sent a particular message, conveniently forgetting to mention that they deleted it. They can claim that a social media post never existed while knowing they edited or removed it. They can insist that a conversation happened differently than you remember while having a digital trail that supports their revised version of events. Abusers systematically undermine their victims' perception of reality through a gradual process that starts with small inconsistencies and escalates to complete reality revision. They begin by questioning minor details about conversations or events. Did you really wear that shirt yesterday? Are you sure the restaurant was closed when we got there? Didn't you say you wanted to stay home tonight? These small challenges to your memory seem harmless at first, but they plant seeds of self-doubt that grow over time. Psychological impact of constantly doubting your own experiences and memories is profound and often underestimated. When someone consistently tells you that your perceptions are wrong, your brain starts to lose confidence in its ability to accurately process information. You begin to second-guess every memory, every feeling, and every interpretation of events. This creates a state of chronic uncertainty that makes it difficult to trust your own judgment about anything, not just your relationship. Research reveals that gaslighting affects brain function in measurable ways. A 2025 study found that victims of gaslighting showed decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and critical thinking. The constant questioning of their perceptions literally rewires their brain to doubt their cognitive abilities. Statistics Korea reported that approximately 34% of adolescents experience online gaslighting, which leads to diminished self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and potential long-term trauma. Modern gaslighting through digital communication has become particularly sophisticated because abusers can manipulate electronic evidence to support their false narratives. They might send you a text message, then delete it from their phone and claim they never sent it. They could edit a social media post after you've seen it, then insist it always said something different. They might screenshot conversations out of context to make your responses look unreasonable or aggressive. The anonymity and lack of immediate accountability in digital environments make these manipulative behaviors easier to execute and harder to prove. Text message gaslighting has become especially common because conversations happen in fragments over time, making it easier to deny or reinterpret what was actually said. Your partner might promise to do something via text, then claim they were being sarcastic or that you misunderstood their tone. They could send mixed messages throughout the day, then insist that the overall conversation meant something completely different than what you understood. They might respond to your concerns with messages that sound supportive in writing, but contradict their actual behavior, then point to the texts as proof that they're being reasonable and caring. At this point, you basically feel like you need a body camera and a court stenographer following you around just to prove your own experiences. You start screenshotting conversations before the other person can delete them. You begin writing down details of important discussions immediately after they happen because you know your memory will be challenged later. You find yourself gathering evidence of your own life like you're preparing for a legal case, which is completely exhausting and shouldn't be necessary in a healthy relationship. This manipulation tactic serves multiple purposes for the abuser beyond just winning individual arguments. It makes victims psychologically dependent on the abuser for their version of truth and reality. When you can't trust your own memory or perceptions, you start relying on your partner to tell you what really happened. They become the authority on your shared experiences, your feelings, and even your own thoughts. This dependency makes leaving feel impossible because you've lost confidence in your ability to accurately assess situations or make good decisions independently. The damage to your relationship with reality becomes so severe that you start to question experiences that have nothing to do with your partner. You might wonder if you really saw what you think you saw during a conversation with a coworker. You could second-guess your memory of events that happened before you even met your partner. You begin to treat your own mind like an unreliable witness that can't be trusted to accurately report on your experiences. Recovery from this type of manipulation requires rebuilding your confidence in your own perceptions and memories. The key insight is recognizing that if you constantly question your own reality, someone might be systematically rewriting it for their own benefit. But when you can't trust your own experiences, it becomes almost impossible to share what's really happening with the people who care about you most. The secret keeper's burden. This communication breakdown transforms you into someone who lives with secrets that feel too dangerous to share with the people who care about you most. Amanda's friends have stopped asking about her relationship with Ryan entirely. Every time someone used to bring up how things were going between them, Amanda would immediately pivot the conversation to something else. "Oh, you know how it is," became her standard response, followed by a quick subject change to work gossip or weekend plans. Her sister tried asking direct questions about whether everything was okay at home, but Amanda would laugh it off and redirect the conversation to her sister's dating life instead. Eventually, people got the message that Amanda's relationship was off limits for discussion, which is exactly what she wanted. The problem is that carrying this secret has become heavier than a backpack full of textbooks that she can never put down. The psychological weight of maintaining a false image while hiding painful truths creates a burden that affects every aspect of your daily life. You become a professional performer, constantly managing how you present yourself to the world while concealing the reality of what happens behind closed doors. This performance requires enormous mental energy because you have to remember which version of your story you've told to which people. You need to monitor your facial expressions, control your emotional reactions, and carefully edit your words to maintain the illusion that everything is fine. Living with this level of secrecy creates a split between your public self and your private reality that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. You develop two completely different identities. There's the version of you that shows up to work, family gatherings, and social events who seems happy and well-adjusted. Then there's the version of you that exists in your relationship, walking on eggshells and managing another person's emotions while sacrificing your own well-being. The gap between these two versions of yourself grows wider over time, creating an internal conflict that's exhausting to sustain. Shame and fear work together to keep victims silent about their experiences in ways that go far beyond simple embarrassment. The shame tells you that somehow you deserve the treatment you're receiving or that you should have been smart enough to avoid getting into this situation. The fear tells you that speaking up will make things worse, that people won't believe you, or that you'll be judged for staying in a relationship that everyone else can see is harmful. A 2025 study published in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence found that individuals who experienced high levels of shame were 60% less likely to report abuse or seek professional help. Research from the National Domestic Violence Hotline in 2025 revealed that approximately 80% of individuals in abusive relationships hide details of the abuse from friends and family. This widespread secrecy isn't accidental. It serves the abuser's interests by preventing victims from accessing support systems that could help them recognize the abuse or find resources to leave. The secrecy also prevents accountability, making it easier for abusers to continue their behavior without facing consequences from the victim's social network. The elaborate stories people create to hide bruises, explain mood changes, or cover up controlling behavior become increasingly complex over time. You might tell your coworkers that you're tired because you've been staying up late binge-watching shows, when really you've been lying awake anxious about your partner's mood swings. You could explain away your cancelled dinner plans by claiming you're not feeling well, when actually your partner created a scene about you spending time with friends. You might attribute your weight loss to a new fitness routine, when really you've lost your appetite due to stress and anxiety. You become a creative writing expert when it comes to explaining away red flags, developing plot lines that would impress professional screenwriters. You craft detailed backstories for every bruise, elaborate explanations for every mood change, and convincing narratives for every cancelled plan. The irony is that all this creative energy goes toward protecting someone who's harming you rather than pursuing goals that could actually improve your life. The mental gymnastics required to maintain these false narratives exhaust your psychological resources in ways that aren't immediately obvious. A 2025 study in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that victims who frequently made excuses for their abusers experienced a 40% increase in symptoms of anxiety and depression. The constant effort to create coherent stories that hide the truth while maintaining your public image drains mental energy that could be used for work, hobbies, friendships, or personal growth. The isolation that comes from being unable to share your reality with others creates a prison of silence that reinforces the trauma bond. When you can't talk about what's actually happening in your most important relationship, you lose access to the outside perspectives that could help you recognize unhealthy patterns. You miss out on the validation that comes from having others confirm that your experiences are real and your feelings are justified. The relief and validation that comes from finally speaking truth can be transformative in ways that surprise people who have been keeping secrets for months or years. A 2025 study in the Journal of Traumatic Stress found that individuals who disclosed their experiences of abuse to a support network experienced a 35% reduction in PTSD symptoms within 6 months. Breaking the silence allows you to reconnect with your own reality and receive confirmation that your experiences are real and your feelings are justified. When you finally share your story with trusted friends, family members, or professionals, you often discover that your situation was more obvious to others than you realized. People might tell you they were worried about you, but didn't know how to bring up their concerns. They could share that they noticed changes in your behavior or mood that you thought you were successfully hiding. Understanding that healthy relationships don't require a security clearance to discuss is the key insight that can help you recognize when privacy has crossed the line into harmful secrecy. But even when you intellectually understand that your relationship is unhealthy and that keeping secrets is making everything worse, actually breaking free from these patterns triggers a response in your brain that feels surprisingly similar to withdrawing from a powerful substance. The addiction-withdrawal parallel. Picture trying to quit smoking, but instead of cigarettes, you're addicted to a person who treats you terribly most of the time, but occasionally makes you feel like the most important person in the world. That's what attempting to leave a trauma bond feels like. Your rational mind knows the relationship is destroying your mental health, but your body craves the person like an addict craves their next fix. You might go a few days without contact and feel like you're doing well. Then suddenly you're hit with an overwhelming urge to text them that feels as powerful as any drug withdrawal symptom. The neurochemical similarities between trauma bonding and substance addiction are not just metaphorical. They're scientifically documented and frighteningly real. Both experiences hijack your brain's reward system in nearly identical ways. When someone treats you poorly most of the time, but occasionally shows you intense affection, your brain releases the same cocktail of chemicals that create dependency in drug addiction. The unpredictable nature of when you'll receive kindness makes your brain obsess over the next potential reward, just like a gambling addict can't stop pulling the slot machine lever. Your brain becomes fixated on the familiar pattern of the relationship, even when every logical part of your mind recognizes that the pattern is harmful. The cycle of tension, explosion, and reconciliation becomes your brain's new normal. your nervous system adapts to living in a constant state of hypervigilance, followed by brief periods of relief when your partner is kind to you. Over time, this cycle feels more familiar and comfortable than actual stability would. Your brain starts to interpret consistent, healthy treatment as boring or even suspicious, because it's so different from what your nervous system has learned to expect. The physical and emotional withdrawal symptoms that occur when you try to break free from these relationships can be more intense than people expect. You might experience genuine panic attacks when you consider ending the relationship. Your body can react with nausea, headaches, and insomnia that feel identical to physical drug withdrawal. You could find yourself shaking when you try to block their number or delete their photos from your phone. These aren't signs of weakness or evidence that you're making the wrong decision. They're your brain's automatic response to losing its primary source of dopamine and adrenaline. Research reveals exactly how trauma bonds affect brain chemistry in ways that mirror substance addiction. Studies show that people in trauma-bonded relationships experience the same changes in their prefrontal cortex that occur in cocaine addiction. The areas of your brain responsible for rational decision-making become less active, while the regions associated with craving and compulsive behavior become hyperactive. This neurological rewiring explains why you can intellectually understand that the relationship is harmful while still feeling unable to leave. The intense cravings that accompany attempts to leave can surprise people with their strength and persistence. You might find yourself checking their social media obsessively, driving past places you used to go together, or creating excuses to contact them about practical matters that could easily be handled by someone else. The cravings don't follow a logical timeline. You could feel strong and determined in the morning, then be overwhelmed with the need to reach out to them by afternoon. These fluctuations aren't evidence of poor self-control. They're symptoms of a brain that's trying to readjust its chemical balance after losing its primary source of stimulation. The anxiety that comes with trying to break these patterns often feels disproportionate to the actual situation. You might experience racing thoughts about what they're doing, who they're with, or whether they miss you. You could have difficulty concentrating at work because your mind keeps returning to memories of good times you shared together. Sleep becomes elusive because your brain won't stop replaying conversations or imagining scenarios where you get back together. This anxiety isn't irrational. It's your nervous system's response to losing the relationship that had become its primary source of both stress and relief. Depression frequently follows the initial anxiety phase as your brain struggles to function without the chemical highs and lows it had grown accustomed to. Everything might feel flat and colorless compared to the intensity of the relationship you left behind. Activities you used to enjoy seem pointless or boring. You might find yourself wondering if feeling nothing is worse than feeling the pain and excitement of the trauma bond. This depression phase is temporary, but it can last longer than most people expect because your brain needs time to remember how to find satisfaction in healthier, less dramatic sources of pleasure. Your brain essentially becomes a terrible life coach during this process, offering advice that sounds reasonable, but is actually designed to get you back into the familiar pattern of dysfunction. It might tell you that the relationship wasn't really that bad, that you should give them another chance, or that you'll never find anyone else who makes you feel as intensely as they did. Your brain presents these thoughts as logical conclusions when they're actually withdrawal symptoms disguised as rational thinking. Learning to recognize when your brain is giving you addiction-driven advice rather than genuine wisdom becomes a crucial skill in the recovery process. Willpower alone isn't enough to break these patterns because trauma bonds operate below the level of conscious choice. You can't simply decide to stop craving someone any more than you can decide to stop craving food when you're hungry. The neurochemical dependency that develops in these relationships requires the same kind of systematic approach that's used to treat substance addiction. This includes understanding triggers, developing coping strategies, and gradually retraining your brain to find satisfaction in healthier relationships and activities. Professional support plays a crucial role in healing from trauma bonds because the patterns are often too complex and deeply rooted to address alone. Therapists who specialize in trauma and addiction can help you understand the neurological aspects of what you're experiencing and develop specific strategies for managing withdrawal symptoms. Support groups provide connection with others who understand the unique challenges of leaving these relationships. The gradual healing process requires patience with yourself as your brain slowly remembers how to function without the constant drama and intensity of the trauma bond. Recovery happens in stages that don't follow a neat timeline. You might have several good days followed by a period where the cravings feel overwhelming again. This isn't evidence that you're moving backward. It's a normal part of how your nervous system adjusts to operating without its former source of chemical stimulation. Understanding that the difficulty of leaving doesn't mean you should stay. It means you need support is the crucial insight that can shift your perspective from self-blame to self-compassion. The intensity of your withdrawal symptoms isn't proof that the relationship was good for you. It's proof that the relationship had hijacked your brain's reward system so completely that leaving feels like a medical emergency to your nervous system. But understanding these patterns and their effects on your brain is actually the foundation for something much more important than just surviving the withdrawal process. That foundation becomes the pathway to genuine healing and authentic relationships that don't require constant emotional management or reality checking. Recognizing these patterns marks the beginning of reclaiming your authentic capacity for healthy love. Your brain can heal from trauma bonding, but it requires acknowledging that these warning signs represent genuine threats to your well-being rather than evidence of passionate romance. If you recognized yourself in any of these scenarios, trust those instincts. They're trying to protect you from further harm. Seeking support isn't weakness. Professional counselors, trusted friends, and domestic violence resources exist because healing from these patterns requires community. You deserve relationships that energize rather than drain you, that trust rather than surveil you, and that encourage your growth rather than diminish your sense of self. Genuine love doesn't require survival mode to exist.